Hey, what's up? Back at you with another video. Today we're looking at Nota Baloyi, Nota, on a channel called Alles Afrikaans, Beyond the Borders. This looks like an Afrikaans channel. Alles, all about Afrikaans. And so they've got Nota over here, and it looks like it's a civil conversation. If you've been keeping up with the channel, you would remember just recently we dealt with Nota giving an apology. So after all he's been saying and all he's been doing, he now finally had to apologize because the Human Rights Commission has stepped up and pressed him to do so. And he has done so. So we watched the Colonel Chris Wyatt's pretty much footsec the apology. We watched Ronaldo Host also footsec the apology. And now let's hear if he's here being sincere, genuine, or if he's punking this Afrikaner gentleman, if he's playing him, if he's luring him into the net of street YouTube that we live on. He looks like a modest Afrikaner man, mature, adult, with a beautiful voice-over voice.
Bloodless revolution.
So let's see how him and Nota relate and whether this conversation is authentic.
And for me, I don't want that until to become an eventuality.
My guest is Nota Baloyi, if I say that correctly, a renowned South African music executive, a rapper, an entrepreneur who recently got into hot water for calling white people Neanderthals, for which he has in the meantime apologized. The apology was issued yesterday by Mr. Baloyi after the South African Human Rights Commission took him to the Equality Court.
I deeply regret the incidents and offer my heartfelt apologies for any distress caused by my words. My words were inappropriate and I'm genuinely sorry for any harm caused. I specifically wish to apologize to the white community for my remarks. My words were hurtful and inappropriate, and I deeply regret the pain they may have caused.
Welcome, Nota. Thank you very much for talking to me. Why did you accept my invitation?
Nice question.
You're a South African.
Good enough reason.
And yeah, we love connecting with one another, no matter where we are in the world. I remember watching the Rugby World Cup in New York City, right? And it was nice when we were playing against the Irish, you know, because there's a lot of Irish people, there's a lot of Irish and Scottish clubs in New York where we could watch the games, you know. And after the final, you know, I was in Chelsea, Manhattan when I was watching it. After the final, you know, we had a TV screen outside, almost on the street at the hotel we were watching. And, you know, it was a gathering of South Africans, maybe like 30 or 40 odd of us. And we're all celebrating as if, you know, the world, the rest of the world knew what was happening. And it was just very odd when some New Yorkers started walking past and say, okay, what are you guys celebrating? And we said, we won the World Cup. And they're like, the World Cup in what? The World Cup in rugby. Congratulations, I guess, you know, but they had no idea the meaning of it, you know. And although we were lonely and secluded, we all have memories of how the game of rugby has brought South Africans together. South Africa as a country started for me then. You know, that's my first memory of what it meant to be a South African, winning a Rugby World Cup, you know, and celebrating with people who look differently, come from different parts of the world, speak different languages, but can all understand each other's languages, whether they can speak it or not.
Would you permit me to be a little bit cynical here? Because I've lived in Europe for a long time, and I have known what it is like when some event happen here and we meet one another here, black, white, pink, purple, no matter what your color might be. We all seem to love each other. We all seem to embrace each other. And we really feel, in my language, I would say, we really feel that spirit of Ubuntu, that spirit of oneness. However, when we go back to South Africa, that seems to dissipate.
I actually find the opposite, actually.
Really?
I feel like, there's a German term. I don't know how to pronounce it properly. My German is very limited. I know Guten Morgen, Guten Tag. Actually, I think it's Schadenfreude.
Schadenfreude. Yes, I know it. Yeah.
And other than double speak, Schadenfreude is like a South African pastime. I think someone told me that we're very much like Sweden in that respect, in that we're very humble. We're not boastful as a people, no matter what. If someone asks you how you're doing in South Africa, you're more likely to say, "Hey, well, I'm trying." Hey, I take it one day at a time, or things like that. And that's because we're very in touch with the reality that we're living in. And when we're at home, we're confronted with that reality. So there is no space for pretentiousness about it, right? So we get on with our business, and I guess people don't want to be too casual, just in general, because life is tough in South Africa, and life is tough as a South African. You know what I mean? But when you're tested, if you get stuck on the side of the road, if you run out of petrol, and you need to knock on someone's door for a canister, to collect petrol or whatever it is, all of those instances, race is completely erased. And we've got such an interdependency within our country that any racial tension is merely, I guess, an expression of other frustrations that don't get an outlet. There are very few, let's say, people in South Africa, especially within the white community, right, that do not grow up with black people in general, but historically it was mostly native South Africans in the home, whether it be taking care of children, taking care of the household, taking care of the gardening or everything like that. And when you've got such an intimate relationship within your home, whether it's an employer-employee relationship, it becomes a really, really close and tight relationship. I think for me, I'm a unashamedly a big Leon Schuster fan, and it's become very difficult to say that nowadays, because you need to be aware of who is listening and who might or might not be offended by that. But as far as socializing me, I found that his movies were very, very helpful. Yes, they played into a lot of stereotypes, but if you come from the background that I came from, I was born in 1990, just maybe a month after Nelson Mandela was released from jail and the ANC was unbanned. We were living in Soweto at the time. When I turned 1 year old, my father purchased land as soon as the Group Areas Act was repealed in 1991 in what was previously a white suburb. And thankfully, the rest of the community gave us permission to purchase that land, because at a certain time we needed to, find permission from neighbors to acquire land in certain restricted areas for certain groups. So I found that, the gap culturally was very big, because most white South Africans at the time, when I was a very young boy, had only encountered black South Africans that either worked for them or were workers somewhere where, they were patrons. And therefore, it would be a very foreign thing for a white child to grow up with a contemporary black child, right? And that child is not the child of his parents' servant.
Yes.
In the suburb where I grew up, in Olivedale, every other black child within our neighborhood was the child of a servant.
Yep. Yeah.
So that also was very difficult to understand at first for me, and also made me very apprehensive in opening myself up. But because of things like, Leon Schuster's movies, we could all enjoy certain things together, certain gags together. We could see ourselves being represented, or our parents being represented in the films. And that helped us have something that binds us in common,
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of the white children that grew up with me or around me, that also helped them see black people in a completely different light from what they had been exposed to previously. And
I want to interrupt you here. I'm going to interrupt you
no
here.
problem.
I want to bring you also back to the actual reason why I invited you here. But let me just give you an idea of how times have changed. You just told me that you grew up as a little black boy in what essentially would be a white community at the time, born in 1990, the year of Nelson Mandela's freedom.
Hey, some quick shameless self-promotion over here. If you love and enjoy this channel and you also happen to love dope gadgets, you can support my new baby, my new startup, my new retail venture, Gadget Plug. In case you've only ever known me as a YouTuber, you'll be glad to know that I'm also a wedding and documentary film producer, pro video editor, and all-round entrepreneur with a love for high-end gadgets like cinema cameras, gaming consoles, powerful GPUs, computers, and mobile phones. And my electronics store Gadget Plug is your new go-to place for the latest and greatest in tech. We're talking real gadgets, real quality, real quick, at the best prices in all of South Africa. To know more about this, head on over to my website imneo.co.za and check out my e-commerce store today. As we officially kick off business, Gadget Plug has stock right now of iPhone 16 Pro Max in 256 and 512 gig at 25,000 and 28,000 respectively. Simply press the green button at the bottom of my website if you want to inquire, and one of my friendly customer service agents will attend to you. Thank you very much for your support. And now back to the video.
Yes.
I've told this story many times to many people here in Europe, and they always find it unbelievable when I tell them.
So he's in Europe.
That it occurred to me in my later years as an adult, reflecting back upon where I come from, that I never, ever saw young black children in the streets where I grew up. I saw the baby of the mother who would very quickly be sent off to go and stay with grandma. But in my entire childhood, during my teenage years, up and until I would imagine in my 20s, I never saw any black children, young boys and girls, in the streets of the environment in which I grew up. That just gives us an idea of how times have changed. But back to the reason why I invited you. This whole thing calling white people Neanderthals, which from my point of view, is a private right that you have, and if you wish to call any other race a Neanderthal, I guess it would be your private right. But when you utter that in public spaces, I think it becomes problematic. You made an apology yesterday, and just before I crossed over to you, I saw an item in one of the South African newspapers saying that the apology that you made yesterday was in fact being rescinded by you, that the apology is no longer an apology. Here I quote from the South African newspaper: "Sorry, not sorry. Nota Baloyi has backtracked on his apology to white South Africans after labeling them Neanderthals." So, to get to the point, what exactly is the situation right now in terms of the apology or not apology?
Yeah, that was a sincere and unconditional apology.
Mm-hmm.
I went to go and meet with the Human Rights Commission, and because the public is not privy to our discussions, because they were held, in private, although they were recorded. If ever anyone needs to inquire about them, I'm sure there will be public access to information, so they could basically go through all the transcripts of the discussions and see what they were about. Now, the issue was not the term Neanderthal. That was not found as the offending statement. The offending statement, in the first instance, right, because it was two instances. So the apology was for the podcast episode, or the utterances on the podcast episode of the 17th, or which was published on the 17th of February, even though it was recorded prior, but it was published on the 17th of February on the Hustlers Corner, as well as the subsequent statements on the G2G podcast on the 17th of February. On the Hustlers Corner, as well as the subsequent statements on the G2G podcast on the 17th of February. On the Hustlers Corner, as well as the subsequent statements on the G2G podcast on the 17th of February. On the Hustlers Corner, as well as the subsequent statements on the G2G podcast on the 17th of February. On the Hustlers Corner, as well as the subsequent statements on the G2G podcast on the 17th of February. On the Hustlers Corner, as well as the subsequent statements on the G2G podcast on the 17th of February. On the Hustlers Corner, as well as the subsequent statements on the G2G podcast on the 17th of February. On the Hustlers Corner, as well as the subsequent statements on the G2G podcast on the 17th of February. On the Hustlers Corner, as well as the subsequent statements on the G2G podcast on the 17th of February. On the Hustlers Cor 19th of March.
We don't understand white people. White people are inferior species to us. We are Homo sapiens. They've got Neanderthal blood in them. This is the science, and this is not science that was done by black people. It was done by them.
Now, during our discussions, what was cited to me, right, when we had deliberations, because when I was given the letter of demand, I was not in agreement that, I'd done anything wrong on my part, right? But I did want to make representations to the Human Rights Commission. And when I came there, I also had to hear what their representations were. And because of the statements were with my intention to speak metaphorically, right? It was taken as a statement by many people. Now, whether or not they took it as intended is irrelevant, right? To me, let me put it that way. Whether they took it as intended is relevant. My intention was to make a metaphoric comparison between a wild dog and a domesticated dog that is kept as a pet, and make an analogy based on the dogs themselves as human, in terms of characterizing their behavior. Many people.
So a house dog and a wild dog, that's the comparison of these dogs as humans.
People took that to mean that I was referring to white people as dogs, as to say white people are actually dogs, where if you actually look at the statement itself, when I say that we can't treat white people like we would treat upobi in our home, using a word that's commonly used with a dog's name like Bobby, yeah, it's a commonly, Bobby, Blackie, Sporty, depending on which suburb you live in. So when I made that analogy, my intention was never to say that now you must think of white people as dogs and black people as humans or people.
But let me cut in here. Just make it very, very clear to me. Say it as straight as you can.
Yes.
Did you actually make the comparison or the reference that white people are, in terms of their development, Neanderthals? That's really actually all that I'm interested in knowing.
Yeah.
Even if you said so, even if it's a metaphor, then explain that metaphor to me.
Okay. So no, that one was as a matter of fact, in terms of a genetic fact,
All right. So let me be very clear about that. So the statement is, as a matter of fact, Nota is saying, as a matter of fact, that white people, are Neanderthals, or are Neanderthals in terms of the development, or are like Neanderthals? Narrow it down exactly to what are you saying?
As in genetically speaking, and it's not just white people. In fact,
but genetically
speaking, Southern African, especially Sub-Saharan African, but I'll say Southern African in particular, blacks have got no Neanderthal DNA, whereas Europeans have got a nominal number of Neanderthal DNA. And if you go further to the east of Asia, or further east into Asia and to far East Asia, it's even in a higher percentage genetically of Neanderthals.
Okay, so this is not a metaphor. This is a scientific statement that you make.
Yeah, this is a scientific statement, and so because of the format in which we do podcasting, it's a very long form. So. People miss certain details of explanations, and the premise there was to basically make, especially black people, understand the existentialism of white culture. So white culture currently, even historically, but very much so currently, right, has got many challenges in that because of whatever history of colonial.
Is he going to talk about white people being replaced, their replacement theory? Is he saying, I was talking about these fundamental species. I don't believe that. I'm not convinced of it. I don't know what this Neanderthal thing is about and how they say people mixed with Neanderthals and some were born by Neanderthals. He's saying that the Neanderthals are afraid of being wiped out as a species. So white people do not see themselves as just white. They themselves see themselves as a different, coming from a different monkey, and the black person coming from a different monkey. So they don't want their monkey race to be extinguished from the earth, replaced. So it's a fight between the species, not just on the race level. It's a fight for their DNA, their genes.
Colonialism and everything else, there's a new world order that came into play, where nation states came into being. Their sovereignty had to be respected. You couldn't conquer foreign lands and occupy them as territories, as we developed it. But this is recent developments, as recent as the 1950s onwards. Prior to that, it was free reign. Might was right. And because of now that history, there's a lot of adversarial relationships between people all over the world, especially those that were dominated to the ones who were in the dominance or in the ascendancy. And Western culture has had a hegemony on, the global order for over 100 years. I think maybe 3 centuries. Over 3 centuries of Western hegemonic order in the global order. And because of that, white people especially find themselves in a precarious position, socially speaking, because everything that was done for the advancement of Western culture, right, was done by the elites, and yet when we critically analyze the era of colonialism and Western expansion, right, we also then ascribe everything that was done wrong to all white people, even though majority of them, were, I guess, passengers in a moving train of world development, exploration, and expansion. And thus, what then happens, and I'll use South Africa as an example, right? We look at captains of industry, and when you see all white faces, then you also then assume that all white people are also part of that elite that benefits from the captains of industry, which is not the truth. In fact, majority of white South Africans are either middle class or working class, and have been so for a very long time. But even if you're just a middle class or working class white South African, you're still seen as a brutal settler, colonizer, conqueror, murderer, rapist, all of that. And therefore you carry that guilt with you because you wear it in the color of your skin, which has given you an identity which makes any person that is fond of their whiteness endemic to any other group.
I should ask the question, perhaps this chap had just smoking a big fat old joint and is coming up with this really crazy hypothesis, which is scientifically doesn't seem to make any sense to me. Try to clarify to me.
It's a Tuesday today. It's a Tuesday today, so we stay away from greens during the
well. I mean,
for productivity purposes, yeah.
But
no, I do understand.
I'm trying to wrap
understand.
I'm trying to wrap my brain around this, and I'm not a scientist, so I'm not quite sure what I should do with what you've just told me now. But let's try to summarize it now. As of right now, if you look at me, you and I are sitting 12,000 kilometers away from one another. I'm born in South Africa in 1957. I say I am a South African. I am a South African. I regard myself.
My mother's age.
I regard myself as absolutely an African, and absolutely undeniably as a South African. I identify with the soil of Africa. I am part of Africa. I'm an African. But I have a different pigmentation from yours, and you are saying to me categorically that makes me, in this strangely concocted narrative of yours today, as I'm sitting here, a Neanderthal.
It's about the presence of certain
Bye-bye,
genes.
ma'am.
And let me put it to you like this. Someone who's a complete speciesist, right, which is not me, would say, well, if white people or more light-skinned people have got recessive genes, then, I mean, that is an existential deficiency, and therefore nothing can be done to protect them. So if ever they were to ever say, listen, we'd like to maintain, our our heritage, we'd like to maintain our culture, and we'd like to maintain our race as it is and as it stands. And because of the fact that our genes are more recessive, we need to isolate for that. Currently, in the way the world is, that would be called preposterous, right? But then you are completely ignoring the reason as to why such a decision would be reasonable to people who are trying to protect their culture and heritage from what is an actual existential threat. So now what you have is that the most threatened race is also the most dominant race.
So this is, yes, a threat of the species, the race. He's making his case. How are you enjoying it?
And because they're the most dominant race, right? It's like, as a man, you're more dominant than a woman. So if a woman offends you, you can't just beat her.
What is the value attached to this when you say to white people worldwide, for that matter, not only in South Africa, that you are Neanderthals? What is the value judgment of that? What does that mean?
Yeah, so you see, also another thing that came about is that whole entire podcast was speaking completely exclusively to Black people. And because of the tensions that are in the country currently, and they're exacerbated by the fact that they're expressed on social media, etc., right? Because of the tensions, right? There is no one that is speaking to Black people directly as to how to deal with what they feel is a provocation. And at the same time, there is no one to basically say that there is no intention by Black people to enact violence upon whites or attack whites, or even the means to do so. Like we said at the very beginning, in South Africa, we still live very separately in racially divided suburbs. You know what I mean? Less so now, especially in the urban areas, but it is still, very common to refer to certain areas as white areas, Black areas, colored areas, and Indian areas, and that is a legacy of our past, and also a personal preference of many people to stay closer to people who are closer to their culture. The issue is that with the provocations that we're seeing, right, the motivations behind the provocations have got nothing to do with either creating social cohesion or enhancing social discourse about how to unify the country, but opportunism. So for me, as a Black South African, when I see Julius Malema going out there singing "Kill the Boer" and explaining it in such a manner that he knows that there will be more political will to protect his free speech, as offensive as it may be in that instance, then there is political will to actually say that that's something that should be left in the past, along with all the other stains in our history, right?
Hey, yo, let me leave this over here, man. Y'all go listen to this one. This one was a listening session. I wish to hear more of this, but let me cut the episode. You can go and watch Alles Afrikaans. Go check out the comments. This has attracted a lot of comments in there, and a lot of the white people just didn't buy it. Many even said that he should not have been brought on here. So like, comment, share, and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next video.